Hello, everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Welcome back to Echoes of War, joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, great to be back again, and I guess start of a new mini series.
Yes, so you Pacific War fans will be happy. This is going to be a series covering the entire Malaysian campaign of World War II. But before we jump into it, I just want to tell you how you can further support this channel. You can check out our YouTube membership or the Patreon account. Both are identical for perks and prices, where you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And I will just say it here because it took me a long time. I finally finished writing what has been kind of a pet project. A lot of patrons had voted to go through with this. I'm going to be doing a multi-part series. It's going to be an alternate history of the Pacific War, not how Japan would win the Pacific War or anything like that. It's going to be based in extreme research and logic. And I'll just say this much. The first episode is titled The Great Naval Battle of Pearl Harbor. And pretty excited to unleash it, to say the least.
That sounds really tempting. Can't wait for it to come out.
It's a little batshit crazy, mind you, but I found concrete information from interviews that Admiral Chester Nimitz gave in the 50s based off of what he thought might have happened if Pearl Harbor went differently. And that was a lot of the inspiration for what is going to be unfolding in the episode. But that's for another date, and that's behind a paywall for a while. Today, we're going to be jumping into the Malaysian campaign. Specifically, this first episode is going to be covering the invasion of Malaya. So, we have to go back in time quite a bit. We're talking just after World War One. The United Kingdom has established its primary naval base in the east, and this is at Singapore. This is during the 1920s, and they established this to protect their colonial interests in the Far East. Singapore was chosen for its strategic significance, and it was the only British territory exempt from non-fortification clauses in the future Washington Naval Treaty that's in the 30s. The aim
I
was to
think
make,
that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was really one point Britain kept sticking to in the entire Washington Naval Treaty. Like they were willing to decommission their
yeah.
battleships to meet the demand, but I think this was like that one thing that Britain was absolutely not going to budge on.
Well, the idea behind it was, I mean, especially from a Japanese point of view, it was the United Kingdom and the United States just trying to limit the ability of Japan to control more territory in the Pacific because Japan had room to grow, whereas the other two were dealing with kind of domestic and economic crises at the time. So it was in their interest to try and limit everybody, while for Japan it was like basically threatening all of Japan's plans and future operations. So yeah, it was kind of scumbag against the Japanese. But then you could argue it was trying to provide world peace also. And yeah, but the aim of this project was to maintain a robust fleet in the Pacific to deter Japan from engaging in a war. However, this strategy proved insufficient as Japanese aggression in the region escalated, I'd say pretty thoroughly in the 1930s. And as you can imagine, this would pose a threat to British colonies. At the onset of the Second World War in Europe, this further limited the United Kingdom's ability to defend the Far East, leaving British Malaya, Burma, and Hong Kong quite vulnerable if Japan decided they were going to attack. Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill believed that Japan would not dare attack as early as 1941, prompting him to prioritize reinforcements in the Mediterranean theater instead, which
Could I just
makes a lot of
add one
sense.
point?
Yeah, of course.
Uh, the invasion fever that Britain was suffering in the aftermath of the Battle of France was so high that was actually the reason why the U-boats had the happy time, even with the limited
Yeah.
number of escorts that were going, because a lot, except probably the British Mediterranean fleet based in Alexandria, everything was moved from north everywhere to south of England
Hmm.
to prevent the invasion. And this included every naval asset from aircraft carriers to submarines to battleships to destroyers, corvettes, mine layers, fishing trawlers, which were laying mines. That invasion fever was quite high that even, and this was kind of like, what the chiefs of the general staff were firmly entrenched in.
Yeah.
So Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, who was the boss of the Royal Navy at the time. And any protest by commanders like John Tovey, who was like CNC of the Home Fleet, to dispatch escorts to the Atlantic or other theaters were completely ignored.
Yeah, of course. And of course, if an attack would occur, the British defensive plan involved delaying actions, trying to delay the Japanese advance as long as possible while trying to hold down the fortress of Singapore, known as, the Gibraltar of the East. However, the reality behind all of this was that Britain could not afford to send reinforcements to the Far East, rendering any defensive plans pretty unrealistic. Within Malaysia would be Commander in Chief Robert Brooke Popham, and he's going to be commanding the British Far East Command. But I guess, Gaurav, might you have a few things to say about this gentleman?
So Robert Brooke Popham holds a distinction also being the first RAF officer to hold a combined services command when he was appointed CNC of the British Far East Forces in November 1940. So quite a long and distinguished military career. He started service in the army in 1898 and he switched to the Royal Air Force. Well, sorry, one moment. My bad. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Forgot to share the.
For the audience who are listening on audio podcast platforms, just so you know, we've moved Echoes of War onto YouTube, and we're incorporating a lot of visual components. So maps of the battles we're talking about, photos. So Gaurav has now put up a photo of Sir Poppin, and maybe even clips in the future we're going to be putting up. So it might be in your interest to check us out on YouTube.
Yeah. So he was a brigadier general. He was during World War One. He reached the rank of brigadier general, as seen in this photo, and transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. And towards the end of the war, even controlled aircraft production for the ministry. And he continued to move up and oversee the development of the RAF. And 1935, he actually takes over as commander in chief of RAF Middle East. Now, this was in response to Italy's invasion of Abyssinia, but he was there not to really assist the Abyssinians, but just to deter the Reggio Aeronautica from you know uh, sorry interfering with British possessions or threatening them. He retires from active service in 1937, so he's been in service for almost 40 years. Then he is actually made governor of Kenya, and he lays down the plans for with tensions in Europe were already brewing for several years now, so everyone started to make plans, and he actually started to prepare contingencies for Kenya in case the Italians will invade. And one of the contingencies was actually to abandon the capital, Nairobi, with minimal defenses and the highlands and concentrate the defenses against Mombasa, which, while some critics argued was kind of like a really bad idea, there was so much sparse terrain that it actually was a pretty sensible idea. And he was actually quite a very effective governor. He actually tried to improve relationships with everyone within the governors, with the settlers there. And usually the previous British governors actually were quite egoistical, to say the least, and tried to dominate everything. So that led to, opposition. He tried to improve the relationship. So there's a brownie point for him. And his last act in Kenya was actually just before the outbreak of war to intern all German citizens. If I'm not mistaken, I think Roald Dahl was also in Kenya at this time when that happened. It's a fun fact. Uh, he returns to Britain at the outbreak of war and returns to the RAF. And he actually is involved in setting up of the Commonwealth Air Training Plan. This is the plan that the British had with the entire Commonwealth, so South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, to set up air training schools in different locations across the British Empire and Commonwealth to start training the pilots so that when they come over to Britain and Europe or whatever theaters they have to be deployed, they already have the requisite flying hours. It's You won't see the true fruits of this labor coming in 1940, but 1941 onwards, this was a really great initiative that allowed the British to start having a good pool of trained pilots. And as I said earlier, November 1940, he's made commander in chief of the Far East. So he's responsible for Singapore, Malaysia, Burma, and Hong Kong. It's quite a big undertaking. And unfortunately, he was already dealt a pretty horrible hand in the way the command structure was set up. Even though he was commander in chief and on paper the boss of everything there, the army commanders tended to act on their own. All Royal Navy units in the entire Far East did not report to him, they reported to the Admiralty in London. And so too many civic authorities in the area also just worked with their corresponding ministries. So it was really a uphill task. He fought quite hard but unsuccessfully to try to get more resources sent to the Far East to build up the defenses, get more hurricanes, Spitfires, and naval assets. But with the invasion fever, Battle of Britain, and Churchill then wanting to prioritize the Atlantic and Mediterranean theaters, he would only get a trickle of reinforcements at the very least if he was lucky. So he had to make do with what he had. And he was also the guy who would present Operation Matador, which, if properly executed without, say, diplomatic concern, it could have dealt the Japanese a significant roadblock.
which we will get into
But yeah,
later.
as we true. But overall, unfortunately, with the way things happen, the way the Japanese just steamrolled through the Far East, it was a killing blow to his reputation. And in 1942, he pretty much resigned and was. That was the end of all real military career for Robert Brooke Pope.
And he is going to have another commander with him who's going to be in charge of the Malayan ground forces. That is the infamous Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, who I guess I'll leave in your hands to talk about his outstanding career before these events.
Oh, God. I know we've had a great
My
critical
God.
session
The photo,
evaluating
by the way,
him.
the photo that you found,
Yeah.
it's a little better than the horse teeth photo, by the way, that everyone's traditionally sees.
It's it's kind of visible a
Yeah.
bit, but I just thought, okay, I'll just show a nicer photo this time instead of the usual one with him in his field gear in the Far East.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's the one you were referring to. Am I not?
Yeah, the side profile where his mouth is open, it's just, oh boy. Yeah.
All right, so good old Percival. We've been very critical about him in our best and worst general series for the Pacific Theater of Operations. I'm just trying to be very nice today.
Yes.
Um, he enlisted in World War One as and then got promoted to a lieutenant. And during that he was awarded a military cross in 1916 for actions in the war. And he does, see out the war, pretty successfully. And he was a respected soldier, described as very efficient, and given the recommendation to go to the Staff College. It was during the interwar period he made quite a name for himself. He was part of the Archangel Command, where the British and French sent forces in the Russian Civil War to fight for the Russian White forces against the Reds. And he was the second in command and actually got a bar to his DSO as well for his gallantry there. Because it was in an operation that he led that they actually captured 400 Red Army troops. Now, this is also a bit new for me also. In the interwar years, he went to Ireland. He was fighting against the IRA during the Irish independence movement. And, you know, he was probably, he was the most hated commander by the Irish, even more than Montgomery. That is something I know, right, Greg?
That says a lot.
Yeah, and he was effective. I have to give him this. He was effective, but brutal. A lot of people allege that he was very fond of, torturing and detaining any captured IRA personnel or any suspected people, shooting people in the back. So, he was there, but to his credit, he was a great intelligence officer, believed in using intelligence wisely and properly, that allowed him to act with, I would call it a focused aggression. But the way he also treated them, that the IRA in 1920 actually put a bounty on his head for £1,000, which in today's money is worth about 60,000. It's quite a sum. And he would later actually stress, ironically, that the importance of surprise and offensive action in warfare, intelligence gathering and maintaining security and cooperation between different entities. Hmm. Percival, I think you seem to have forgotten these. The
Definitely.
same. Yeah. Then he did serve in the Staff College after this stint with the Irish, and you know, in Second World War, he was pretty much deployed in the Far East. So first, he was a brigadier to the General Staff of the First Corps of the BEF, and after that, he actually did serve in the home front. I'm so sorry. He was, in command of the 44th Home Counties Division when Britain was scrambling for invasion watch. And in 1941, he was promoted to an acting rank of lieutenant general, and he was appointed general officer commanding of Malaysia. And this was quite a bit of a promotion. He's never had any command experience here. There's a problem that Britain seemed to be making quite early in the war with several officers, not only Percival, but our dear friend from North Africa, Neil Ritchie.
Yeah, it's a good comparison.
Yeah, he did try to start training his army when he arrived in mid 1941 because he did have a sizable force, I think almost 90,000 men, mostly Indian and Malaysians, but very raw troops. And he also lost a lot of officers because when you're rapidly expanding an army or any armed forces units, you got to disperse the quality, which really is it's a big detriment to the training in the short term. And with Japan also starting to seize Indochina in 1941, he knew that time is coming, and you know he started to mobilize his forces. And I think that's where I'll just end it with Percival for this episode because I'm sure we'll be getting back
Yeah.
to him in a few minutes.
And as you had already mentioned, that the units that he's going to have on hand, it's about 31 inexperienced infantry battalions, quite untrained for combat specifically in jungle and rubber plantation warfare, which is exclusively what they're going to be fighting in. The battalions were organized into three divisions with a total strength of approximately 88,600 men. And this also includes Malayan garrisons. His air support, which is going to be crucial for Malaysia's defenses, stood upon just 14 squadrons, primarily equipped with very outdated aircraft, which were insufficient for both strike and reconnaissance missions. They had two
Uh, I'm
Vickers.
just, I would just say that considering that we are in a stage where even the Middle East, which is kind of like Churchill's second theater of operations, are still struggling to get hurricanes and Spitfires.
Oh, yes.
There's nothing gonna go here.
Actually, I've just realized, I'm about to talk about the unit disperse, and I think I'm going to bring up a map. Let's see which. Yeah, I think this is probably the best map for this. So, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you get to actually see the places that we're talking about, which, trust me, in this case is going to be quite useful because I don't think many in the West will be familiar with the geography of Malaya. So, there is a map of Malaya.
Yeah, I can see this.
Perfect. So, as I was saying, they have 14 squadrons, primarily equipped with really outdated aircraft. This includes two Vickers Wildebeest squadrons, one PBY Catalina squadron, and that's at Seletar, one Bristol Blenheim number 4 squadron at Taga, one Brewster Buffalo squadron at Simbawang, two other Buffalo squadrons at Kalang, another Buffalo squadron with a Bristol Blenheim 1 squadron at Sigai Pantani, and a Lockheed Hudson squadron at Kotobaru, with another Lockheed squadron with some Blenheims at Kotan, and lastly, another Blenheim squadron at Alor Sitar. A lot of
I'm
Blenheims.
just surprised he has a few Buffalo squadrons because I thought almost everything are going to be biplanes for him.
Yeah, so about those buffaloes, now it reminds me. I had a friend that helped me do a bit of work for my channel, and his job was to kind of track down the history of the buffalo. And it turns out the United States they wanted to get rid of these things by basically 1940 because it was an extremely outdated, very slow, cumbersome, aircraft. And they managed to sell them to the Dutch in the Dutch East Indies, the Finns, and a lot to the British because the British obviously they couldn't be sending their Spitfires and their good aircraft to the Far East. So a lot of them made their way to Malaya. So the Malayan defense was actually really, really reliant specifically on the Brewster Buffalo, which, as anyone who knows kind of their aviation history of World War II, putting a Buffalo against a Zero is absolutely insane. It was bad enough for Wildcat pilots, but a Buffalo, yeah, that's it's going to be pretty rough. For those who don't know, the Buffalo is a kind of chubby looking, pretty, I would say it's a pretty stout fat looking aircraft. It goes very slow. A lot of armor, but it's completely outmaneuvered by pretty much everything.
Uh, I think when you just talk about like a stout fighter aircraft of World War II, the only one that ever comes to my mind is the P-47.
Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty stout. And of course, let's talk about. I just want because I think it's useful, especially for again. You should, if you guys can, watch this on YouTube. This is really going to help. But to go over where these units are placed at the initial invasion. So we have the northern part of Malaya, which consists of Kedah, Kelatan, Perlis, and Perak. And here the 11th Indian Infantry Division is under Major General David Murray Lamb. And he stationed most of his units at Kotobaru, Jita, and Alasetar. And these places by today are actually known as Kalatan, Kada, and Perlis. And they're primarily responsible for defending key airfields that are really close to the Thai border. Because the idea of the defense of Malaya at this time is you exert your air power. And the best way to do so is obviously have your airfields pretty close to where you think the enemy's going to be coming from. So they would have suspected basically from Thailand, more or less. And then you have amphibious assaults on the eastern side from the Japanese specifically. But defending the northern part of Malaya would strongly rely on their ability to project their air power. There's also the 8th Indian Infantry Brigade that's specifically guarding Kotobaru, and that's important because that's going to be a key location for amphibious assaults. And there's RAF airfields at El Setar, Butterworth, and Kotobaru. They're pretty lightly defended, all things given. In central Malaya, and this includes places like Slim River, Kampar, and Ipoh, the 9th Indian Division, they're going to be responsible for delaying actions because, I mean, not to give away what's going to happen, I guess, in the campaign series, but the Japanese are going to advance pretty quickly. So they're going to be doing a lot of delaying things and creating defensive lines spontaneously, we'll say. Defensive positions were also set up at Jitra and Gurun, but these are pretty last minute and they're, you could argue, a bit weak. Then there's Southern Malaya, which consists of Johor and, of course, Singapore. Here, the Australian 8th Division is being led by Major General Gordon Bennett, and they're stationed near Mersing and Johor, and they're more or less expecting to be the last stand. And of course, the real last stand is the Fortress of Singapore, which
And
definitely is impressive.
I just saw my favorite place on the map, Malacca.
Yeah, Malacca, I know. Yeah.
Just because I have a few Greek friends and I know what and
I
Malacca.
I worked in many kitchens with Greeks, and I can say that Malacca is thrown around a lot. Oh yeah. Especially when you work with Greeks and Italians, 'cause it's Sprats from the Italians and it's Malacca from the Greeks. Always a fascinating relationship when they're yelling at each other. But I just
That sounds
says,
fun.
oh, it's fun. You know, they tend to throw things at you in the kitchen too, and they get angry. So I'll just just say that much. But as for naval forces, Malaya and Singapore would have Force Z as their main naval defender. Now, a week before the Pacific War would begin, Prime Minister Churchill, despite numerous warnings from his admirals, he ordered a formidable naval squadron to sail to Singapore in the hopes that it would deter a Japanese invasion of the colony. As I just said, the squadron was known as Force C, centered around two of Britain's most distinguished warships, the battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse. Captain William Davis and his team had outlined the dangers of deploying Force C by stating, quote, "We in plans and operations for the Admiralty were firmly opposed to sending the Prince of Wales to the Far East, especially on our own. The First Sea Lord also strongly argued against the wisdom of dispatching an unbalanced force into an area where we were unaware of the enemy's strengths or capabilities. We warned that such a move would make the Prince of Wales a hostage to fortune." Very ominous. Nevertheless, Churchill was determined to project defiance in the sense of, deterrence. He believed it was essential to maintain good relations with the Americans, and in a speech at the Mansion House on November the 10th, he remarked, "This movement of our naval forces, in conjunction with the United States main fleet, may provide tangible proof to all who are watching that the forces of freedom and democracy have not yet reached the limits of their power." Now, 4C would also, of course, have some escorts. They had destroyers HMS Electra, Express, Encounter, and Junitor. They were actually codenamed Force G, but not to confuse things, we'll just call all of this Force Z because it'll just confuse people. Now, Force Z is going to be commanded by Admiral Sir Tom Phillips, who, might I add, was just promoted to full admiral on December the 1st. So, Gaurav, do you have anything to say about our friend Admiral Phillips? I believe you were muted.
Oh, yeah. I was just waiting for you to also stop sharing because that's Zoom
Yep.
for you. Uh, just let me know if Admiral Phillips's
Admiral
pictures
Phillips
visible
is
now.
up.
So Phillips is definitely you could Sir Tom Spencer Vaughan Phillips. He was nicknamed Tom Thumb because he was quite short as well, and I guess might have been pretty aggressive also. So he did join as a cadet in 1903, midshipman in 1904, and he was a destroyer at commander, for most of his active field command, starting with World War One of destroyers in the Mediterranean and Far East. So I would say that's quite very similar to Admiral Sir Andrew Brown Cunningham, who was also like one of the big British admirals who did not really serve heavily on the capital ships. And he attends, you know, he staff college, goes to the League of Nations, and he gets promoted to captain in 1927. And then, by 1938, he's Commodore, commanding the destroyer flotilla of the British Home Fleet. So it's a definite rising career. And 1939, January 10th, he is a rear admiral because he is now aide-de-camp to King George VI. And, he will continue to go as the deputy chief of the naval staff and then vice chief of the naval staff in the British Combined Chiefs of Staff. So he has a lot of political backing, you could say, in the sense that he's gained the confidence of the king, and he also gains the confidence of Winston Churchill, and that is because not related to this, but Prince of Wales was sailing with HMS Hood when it engaged the Bismarck and Gneisenau. And in the Battle of the Denmark Strait, where Hood famously suffered a serious shell attack, which broke through the thin deck armor of the battle cruiser and exploded the ship from within, which killed all but three of her 1,400 crew.
Including a great uncle of mine, by the way.
Oh, damn! Really?
Yep.
And So what happened was the first inquiry that had actually gone against, um, the cause of Hood's explosion was, it was just like seemed to be just a sham job. It was just like something that the Admiralty just quickly did. They wanted to do it quickly, get it out of the way. And then Admiral Phillips actually led the second inquiry. He investigated all the vulnerabilities and which resulted in Hood's explosion through all evidence available. And that would actually lead to some changes in the, refitting with the ammo magazines of the older British warships so that they are better protected. Since Hood suffered one shot that landed amongst its main batteries ammo magazine, and then you have a grenade from the inside going off. And because of his scrutiny and attention to detail, Admiral Phillips, he was not going to accept anything less, and that actually gained him the respect of Winston Churchill. Now, I'll just also add, Churchill was very headstrong in World War II. A lot of decisions he just made by just looking at the photo or just with his own beliefs. So I think, for example, we were talking about, during our series with, North Africa, the way he treated General Wavell,
Oh
because he
yeah.
would see the units and numbers of men on a piece of paper, but he's not seeing them that who are battle ready for the desert, for example. So that way, I would just say his idea of just dispatching Force Z with the way it was structured, right? Just a battleship and battle cruiser with four destroyers. That's not really a force that the Japanese are going to be even worried about, if I'm just being completely honest. And this was his flagship, the Prince of Wales. It's so sad it got blown up because I'm a big fan of the King George V class.
Yeah, it was a very good ship.
It's, and I think obviously the most distinctive parts of these ships is the fact that they actually had quad turrets and a double, which was very unusual for any ship. But I think that is it for Admiral Tom Phillips not giving away what's going to happen next.
All right. Here, I'm just gonna bring back my map of Malaya. Okay. Yes, Mr. Admiral Phillips is going to have quite a situation at hand. Now, as you had said, he kind of, for lack of better words, was chosen based off of politics more so than maybe knowledge or ability, but he was known to be a very capable officer nonetheless. According actually to Captain Bell, Phillips had a talent for getting along with individuals outside the Navy, including members of the other services, civil servants, diplomats, and especially foreign naval officers. So it seemed like he was a good fit for where he was going. However, his effectiveness as a combat officer was debated, and he was not favored by more aggressive admirals in the Royal Navy, such as Vice Admiral Sir Geoffrey Layton. Despite this, Phillips had proven to be correct on certain strategic matters, even though a lot of his views were kind of overlooked at this time. He strongly was advocating for the use of tanks in Malaya, for example, and he questioned the effectiveness of the Brewster Buffalo, recommending
Just like
instead,
they did.
yeah, he was recommending that Hurricanes be deployed to the Far East, but obviously that is not something the British can do. So it's kind of like, yeah, I would love for Malaya to have the best tanks and the best aircraft that Britain can, afford, but obviously Britain's fighting for its literal survival from Nazi Germany, so that's just not an option. But yeah,
But I guess I just still have to question the size of Force Z that was being dispatched.
well,
It's
again, when Churchill decided that he was going to send 4C, it was a deterrence, but he was also doing so in the belief that the Pacific fleet around the Philippines would be coordinating with 4C. They were going to kind of provide a little bit of a little barrier against Japanese aggression. Again, proved to be a very stupid move, as we all know in retrospect.
true
Uh,
enough. I guess I'm just saying that the they know that Japan has a pretty sizable fleet.
yes, they do.
You 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 also have the super battleships that have now come in.
Yeah.
So And they have way more aircraft carriers at this moment
Yeah. Uh,
than what the US could deploy. US only had 4 carriers. Britain's not sending any carriers here.
no, no, they couldn't afford to. The carrier's main theater is going to be the Mediterranean, where they're going to be battling it out with the Italians and the Kriegsmarine a lot. Though, despite everything I just said about Tom Phillips, well, he seemed to recognize the Brewster Buffalo was a shitty aircraft. Something that he was keenly unaware of, and I won't just blame him. This was something a lot of admirals were guilty of. He didn't seem to understand the airborne threat to capital ships. He's one of these proponents who, many in the Royal Navy, United States Navy, and such, they didn't think that aircraft were really capable of taking down something like a heavy cruiser or a battleship. And that's going to prove to be an inaccurate assessment. His Force Z is also going to face another challenge. The extreme humidity uh, that they would be facing caused malfunctions in the Prince of Wales analog electromechanical equipment in their computer. And this is used specifically for anti-aircraft batteries. So when they're going to come into contact with the Japanese, their anti-aircraft guns are actually going to be pretty screwed up. It's not going to go well for them. And there was an insufficient amount of time to resolve this issue. So basically, when they were coming from the Atlantic over, the change of climate really damaged a lot of their systems, more or less. That's a simplification of what I just said. Admiral Phillips believed that aircraft posed pretty much no threat to moving surface ships, especially, the modern Prince of Wales. And he also perceived that anti-aircraft guns were unanimously going to be victorious over any aircraft that might attack him. I apologize if people can hear my screaming birds in the background. Like they're losing their minds. I think squawking at someone walking their dog outside or something, and they just won't shut up. I apologize. So Force Z would actually arrive to Singapore on December the 2nd of 1941, unaware that the Empire of Japan was on the brink of just invading multiple countries. And as the Repulse approached Singapore, one 19-year-old named Richard Smith would recall, everyone was convinced that the Japanese fleet was completely ineffective, merely made of rice paper and string. We believed we would easily defeat them and create chaos. It would be a simple task, and we would have a great time. This was the mindset while we were anchored in the harbor, with all the lights on. Everyone was ashore enjoying the fine dining, and the colonials we saw were celebrating and having a wonderful time. The fleet had just arrived, and Japan would not dare enter the war. So that kind of gives you an insight into what the crews thought was going to be the outcome of their arrival. Now, Churchill also publicly declared he was sending Force C over, because clearly this was a deterrence. Um, However, the deterrence he thought he was sending certainly did not dissuade the Japanese. Instead, it actually provoked them. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto would send 36 Mitsubishi G4M Nell bombers to bolster the existing Mitsubishi G3M Injas from the Kanoya Air Group and the Gensan Air Group. The pilots began vigorous training to specifically target capital ships. The two capital ships in question, the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. The crews from the Kanoya Air Group and the Gensan Air Group, as well as the Mihori Air Group, trained specifically for torpedo attacks at altitudes of about 10 meters, and they practiced long-range navigation over the ocean so that they could effectively strike fast-moving naval targets. The Gensan Air Group was led by Lieutenant Commander Nichi Nakanishi, the Kanoya Air Group by Lieutenant Commander Shichizo Mayachi, and the Mihoro Air Group was led by Hachiro Shoji. This would actually mark the first occasion in the war where bombers were specifically trained and equipped for ship killing. It was actually unprecedented for the time, as conventional land-based bombers had achieved only limited success in ever attacking ships at sea, particularly in the Mediterranean theater. I mean, of course, you do have some notable examples like the Battle of Taranto, but that was ferry swordfish who were attacking a fleet at port. So as you can imagine, up until this point, the idea of a bomber hitting a moving ship in the ocean, yeah, it would probably seem a little outrageous to most admirals, but the Japanese were specifically training for it. Yamamoto also redirected two heavy cruisers to his southern force, significantly strengthening the Japanese fleet that Admiral Phillips hoped he might be facing. Without aircraft carriers and only a few destroyers, Phillips' Force Z was deemed pretty unbalanced and very, very vulnerable, and this was believed by most senior officers at the time, the Royal Navy. However, this assessment would only come after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, which are going to happen basically simultaneous to what we're about to talk about. Now, I actually want to go a little bit back
It's
in time. Oh,
just too late considering the dates, right? It's
yeah,
just three
exactly.
days later.
Yeah. Now, just to go back in time a little bit, on November the 11th of 1940, a German raider, the Atlantis, seized the British steamer Altmeden in the Indian Ocean, and that ship was found to be transporting some documents intended for our friend Brooke Popham. And these documents contained information regarding the vulnerabilities of the Singapore base. In December of 1940, the Germans passed this intelligence straight to the Japanese. Additionally, in January of 1941, the Japanese managed to decipher British Army codes, gaining insights into the very weakened condition of the fortress of Singapore, which enabled them to strategize for their invasion. Specifically, the British were sending reports. Basically, it was complaints from people in Malaya saying that they had inadequate supplies, inadequate men, inadequate ammunition, for some of the guns and everything. So everything the Japanese would want to hear, they basically broke the codes and got to hear. Really, really bad situation for the British. Now, prior to the hostilities against the West, Japan had also recently adopted a strategy known as Nanshinran. And for us on YouTube, I want to bring up a map. Can you see it, Gaurav?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. This isn't a specific map about Nanshinran, but more or less it shows the trajectory of where the invasions will be coming. But to explain, initially the Japanese had favored another strategy known as Hokushinran, which means northern strike policy, whereas Nanshinran is southern strike policy. Both both are going to be pretty important to the story. But anyways, Hokushinran would have been against the Soviet Union, and the Imperial Japanese Army favored this heavily. That was until they literally got wrecked at the Battle of Crowcall. That's in 1939. The Soviets under General Zhukov, who we've spoken about in some length, exposed their military weaknesses, and the subsequent Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact of 1941 pretty much discouraged the idea of a northern campaign. Now,
That I'll just say Crowcall was probably one of the most decisive defeats the Japanese would face. Like
I
if you just
wouldn't,
take it as a
you know
no, I'm
what?
talking about if you take it as percentage of units that were
Hmm,
committed to the battle that were
yes.
lost. In that regards, it was.
If they continued to fight, the Japanese would have completely lost, and Manchuria could have been invaded. But the Japanese got their shit together and were like, okay, we need to sign something. This is bad. And on the other side, as bad as it was for the Japanese at Khalkhin, you can't overlook the massive amount of casualties the Russians also incurred. Sorry, the Soviets. It was not completely one-sided. Whereas in 1945, when you look at the invasion of Manchuria, that is completely one-sided. That is just an absolute trouncing upon the
Well, that time
Japanese.
they also have like better equipment as well
Oh yeah,
and battle hardened vet. I think if I'm not mistaken, a good chunk of those 1 million troops were actually like veterans in the war against
yep,
Nazi Germany that were redeployed.
yeah, especially armor. It was like Mike Tyson fighting an infant, basically, as you would say. But
Prime Mike Tyson, just so I'm clear.
yeah, exactly. So obviously Nanshinran was going to be favored, and this was strongly backed by the Imperial Japanese Navy, as it would require them. And do remember, the Army and the Navy are fighting for resources. They're literally scratching each other's throats to just be the ones actually controlling what's going on. Now, Nanshinran would be aimed at expanding it's a southward advance, specifically through Southeast Asia and into places in the Pacific. And the reason why they want to do this advance in the first place is they want to secure vital resources such as oil, rubber, tin, anything that is necessary for sustaining Japan's war effort, which primarily, almost majority of which is against China. Because for everyone, just to brutally summarize this, the reason why Japan even goes to war with the West is they've basically been forced into a corner. They want to continue their war against China or they'll lose face. And the only way to continue the war is they basically need to get their hands on some war materials that they don't have. So, push comes to shove, they decide to solve the problem of being in a war by going into another war, which is more common than you would think when it comes to leadership of brutal dictatorships. But leading up to the Pacific War, the United States and their allies, specifically the UK and the Dutch, began imposing and escalating economic embargoes on Japan in response to their aggressive expansion into China and then in Southeast Asia. After Japan invaded China officially, they technically did in 1931, but officially in 1937, the US began imposing a moral, a moral embargo, you would call it, on aircraft and military supplies, and this would take into effect 1938. Then in July of 1940, the United States basically starts restricting exports of aviation fuel and scrap metal. Britain and the Netherlands then start joining in by cutting back Japan's access to their rubber and tin. So this is specifically from like places like Malaya, for example. And then following Japan's occupation of French Indochina in July of 1941, the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands freeze Japanese assets and they effectively halt trade, specifically oil. All three of these nations have oil. So the British have oil in Burma, and the Dutch East Indies has the most oil that's basically right there and available to the Japanese. And then, of course, something like 80% of Japan's oil supply is coming from the States at this time. So after cutting off 80% of everything that Japan needs to continue its war, you can imagine Japan has been put into a corner, especially when it comes to oil. So it has a few options ahead of it, abandon the expansion it's doing, like the China War, or proceed with the Nanshinran strategy. And well, guess what? They went with the Nanshinran strategy. Now, as pertaining to this extremely elaborate strategy, Japan opted to invade territories in the east to seize their abundant resources, notably with many of the Japanese forces stuck in China. Literally, like 35 out of 51 divisions are not going to leave the China theater. They have basically 11 to work with, but they're going to start invading multiple places. By late November, preparations for the assaults are well underway, and on December the 2nd, the command, famously known as Climb Mount Nitaka, is issued initiating the offensives. So from December 1941 to January 1942, Japan launches a series of rapid invasions across the Pacific and Southeast Asia to secure the critical resources and strategic positions. To just go through this a little bit for people who don't know, obviously on December the 7th and the 8th, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. It's a surprise attack to cripple and neutralize the US Pacific Fleet. Simultaneously, they invade Malaya, Thailand, Hong Kong, and then they push into Burma and the rest of Southeast Asia. Now, in the Pacific, they launch operations against the Philippines. That begins on December the 8th with a landing at Luzon and Mindanao. Despite courageous American and Filipino resistance under poor leadership, in my estimation, Manila would fall by January the 2nd, and this would push the defenders to Bataan and Corregidor. Now, within the Dutch East Indies, Japan would eventually invade Borneo by mid December, and they would seize its key oil fields. By January, they start expanding into Sumatra and Java, and Burma is going to get invaded also. And this, of course, is just destroying everything in sight. It's people don't bring it up enough, but the first 6 months of the Pacific War is just incredible. The planning, meticulous, everything goes off almost without a hitch. It's very impressive. As
I
Dan,
think
yeah,
let's just also add, I think the Japanese, for all the operations, right, across the Dutch East Indies, Burma, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Hong Kong, they only commit about 11 or 12 army divisions, with around 35 or so being stuck in China at this time.
yep,
So I think
it's
it's pretty impressive to be launching simultaneous military operations at scale, which are all amphibious in nature.
yeah. I've had this discussion actually with Cody from Alternate History Hub because a long, long, long time ago, he had done some episodes looking into, alternate histories of the Pacific War. And something that he really couldn't fathom was you, despite Japan's immense military and its ability, you can't take out more divisions from China and Manchuria. So the Kwangtung army has to protect the Manchurian border in case the Soviets decide to attack. And then you've got all these other divisions in China that are locked in a absolute attritional war. So you have about 10 to 11 divisions to work with to fight the West in the Pacific, Asia Pacific. It's actually incredible what they managed to do with what is a large force, of course, but in the grand scheme of things, not so much. But yeah, it limited their ability. Like, for example, people have written alternate history books where they invade Hawaii. Absolutely impossible. They couldn't possibly do this. It would be ridiculous. But yeah, Now, to our episode at hand, for the invasion of Malaya, the Japanese planned multiple naval landings in southern Thailand and northern Malaya, followed by a push through the Malayan Peninsula along the western coastal plain, culminating in a grand assault, or better called a siege, upon Singapore. And this would be across the Strait of Johor. The entire strategy was devised by a rather infamous and evil individual, in my estimation, Soichi Masanobu. Did you write anything about Soichi?
Just a little bit. Do you mind just uh,
Yeah, I
letting me
will
share?
stop sharing.
So, Craig, I'll just call out that I know you know these guys way better than me, so feel free to chip in. But Suji Masanobu was, despite having a very prominent role within the Japanese planning and politics, I will add, I'm actually surprised he still remains, he only attained the rank of a colonel. So, Suji Masanobu, he did, like his very early career, there's really nothing to even warrant any information. The most important things start coming out in 1934, where within the Japanese military, there are the two schools of thoughts, right? Or parties, factions, whatever we want to call it. So you have the control faction of the Toshiya, I think that's how you pronounced it, which is where the future Prime Minister Hideki Tojo is a member of. And then you also have the Kodoha faction or the Imperial Way faction. This is interestingly where another protagonist is, I think, the proper term. The guy who will be commanding the invasion is from.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor minute by minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself?
Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software, and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
And this ensured that, as a prominent member of the control faction, he got the patronage and support of Tojo and future War Minister Shishiro Itagi. Now, 1938, he serves with the Kwangtung Army. And he was kind of like the guy that started the initial raids that led to the escalation between the Kwangtung army and the tribes on their side versus Mongolia and eventually the Soviet Union.
Oh yeah, he's actually the guy who's responsible for a lot of the escalations, multiple ones. Oh yeah.
Considering that was an escalation that literally led to the near annihilation of the Kwangtung army. And so at the start of this campaign, he is assigned to the staff of, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the 25th Army.
Hmm.
That is going to be executing the invasion plans, which he did take a key role in.
Oh yeah.
And he is on the staff of General Yamashita, who is the commander in chief of this plan. And as you said, right, when we were discussing our best and worst generals of the Pacific, he was actually put in more as a place to kind of like, keep an eye out on a big rival to Tojo by the prime minister himself.
Yeah, I guess just to
So
explain a bit, Hideki Tojo had a few bitter rivals within the Navy and obviously the Army. For example, Yamamoto is clearly a rival to him because he's the head of the Navy, could potentially be a guy that could seize the government. But
I
Yamashita, as
would,
yeah,
just sorry, I think it would be easy to even say that Yamamoto was probably way more popular with most Japanese than Tojo.
yes. The only problem is Yamamoto wasn't responsible for any enormous victories at this point. This was in the realm of the army. It was the army that was in China. It was the army that took, French Indochina and stuff. So obviously the army was much more in control of, let's say, government functions. And Hideki Tojo managed to get the Year of the Emperor. It's something that, yeah, he was actually chosen because he seemed like a more balanced fit compared to other guys, which is outstanding when you think about like how much he'll escalate things. But he was the leader of the Tosa faction, the control faction. Yamashita wasn't necessarily the leader of the Koda faction, but he was one of the highest ranking leaders, and he was implicated in a coup attempt that they had done, which was actually put down by people like Hideki Tojo. Yamashita would be exiled, he'd be very, very punished for this. He would have to serve time in Korea, and all this other stuff happens, but he still gains a lot of favor because he's a very good commander. And he actually kind of was trained at the same time as Hideki Tojo. They came through like the same system, and they were rivals from a pretty early point. And Hideki Tojo feared Yamashita was somebody who could actually take him out and take his position. So he
Maybe I
intentionally had Toichi over here act as kind of a spy, and he was put
True.
under Yamashita to watch over him and to see if they could probably get rid of him. That's all I'll say.
True. I think I was just saying that considering we already mentioned, maybe I'll just switch over to Yamashita as well.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so General Yamashita, who we did rate as the best Japanese army field commander. So, he is, as we said, was the very senior member of the Imperial Way faction within the army. He had some service in World War One. Granted that Japan did not really play a big role in that conflict. And he was implemented to streamline the operations of the Japanese army right from 1920, despite significant opposition. He's kind of like a bit of a pioneer if we really look at it, the way the ideas Yamashita was also trying to get implemented within the Japanese military doctrine. So, and he's also, as we mentioned, like Admiral Yamamoto or General Kurabayashi, he was quite well traveled for any senior leader. In 1927, he was posted in Vienna for 3 years as military attaché. And he was also promoted to Major General by 1934, having already for 4 years commanding the 3rd Imperial Guard Infantry Regiment. So it's a pretty big honor. And after this February 26th incident, which was that coup that we were just alluding to, he falls out of favor with the emperor, which is a really big disgrace within the Japanese society.
Yeah, he
And
thought well, just to give some information, he almost killed himself. He thought his whole life was over because of this. It was bad.
Yeah, but luckily his superiors did dissuade him from carrying out this action. He was kind of relegated to a post in Korea. It's kind of typical, right? Like when someone of a high rank is out of favor. I think like one of the best examples I can take from like a time gone by was actually Admiral Yi from Korea. And then, but he kind of does regain a bit of favor within a year because in November 1937, he is promoted to a lieutenant general. And his first ideas in 1937 were obviously ignored because he wanted to end the war in China, consolidate, and keep peaceful relationships with Britain and the US. And, he does also serve a bit in the Kuomintang army. But between 1930 to 40, he fights in China. And in December, he actually is sent on a mission to Germany, which, as at this point, I think the tripartite agreement between Italy and Germany and Japan is set to be signed. He even meets Adolf Hitler in Berlin in June of 1941 and Benito Mussolini. And it was here because he was there during the Battle of France.
Yeah,
He saw the
specifically to
effect.
yeah, he was specifically sent to study blitzkrieg warfare.
And he saw the results firsthand, the
Yeah.
way the concentrated use of armor. And he wanted Japan to replicate that. And, he wanted to streamline the air arm, mechanize the army, and integrate control of the armed forces into a defense ministry, coordinated by like a chief of staff. So
hmm
Japan actually did not really have a very good chief of staff system like what we would see Britain and the United States have. I mean, the Italian Comando Supremo and the German OKW, they were kind of more of their leaders' mouthpieces rather than
Yeah.
actual functioning staffs that take decisions. So, though he did also propose an idea that we both, Greg, you and I, did not like was the continuous creation of paratroop units.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a good one.
And this caused even more friction between him and Tojo because Tojo just did not want to do this, while Yamashita is obviously proposing something new. And, on 6 November 1941, he is put in charge of the 25th Army. And he is going to be the commander of the forces that are going to fight the British forces of General Arthur Percival.
All right. Here, let me just bring back up my. Oh, I don't want to give away that yet. I'm going to bring back my original picture. Yes, Yamashita, he for people who want a summarization, he's seen as probably the most competent armor commander that Japan produced, because obviously he spent a lot of time in Germany learning blitzkrieg warfare. And unfortunately, it was too little too late because at that point, Japan couldn't overhaul its entire program, nor could it afford to build the tanks that Yamashita would want or something like that, because most of the resources were going to the Navy, as Nanshinran would be more or less directed by the Navy. But still, he thoroughly researched the Battle of Crowcall and the operations in Europe, and he kind of came up with what he thought would be kind of his version of Blitzkrieg, given the resources he had. And it's going to be important for, the battle he's going to be fighting. So he's going to be leading the 25th Army, and initially is comprised of two divisions, which is also going to be supported by the Second Fleet under Admiral Kondo Nabutake, who's going to be obviously responsible for escorting the convoys that are going to be hitting Thailand and Malaya. Now, the landings in Thailand were crucial, and I want to bring up a little map showing Thailand with Malaya at the bottom. There we go. The landings in Thailand were going to be crucial as the British were unable to defend this region because it's a completely other country, not under their control, obviously. Now, Thailand's leader at this time, I'll summarize his name, it's actually quite long, Marshal Plek Fibun. Gaurav, did you have anything on Fibun? You are muted.
Oh, sorry. I think there's really not too much to say except
Not
for
really,
the
yeah.
fact that he was, one of the leaders of the Siam Royal Army
Mhm.
faction, which in 1932 overthrew the monarchy.
Mhm.
And he was one of the leaders, so that culminated from 1932 to 1938, a rapid rise, because he was at that time just a lieutenant colonel in the army, known as the man on horseback.
Yeah.
And by 1938, he is the prime minister. But he pretty much establishes it as a dictatorship, heavily idolized the running of fascist Italy in the terms
Mhm.
of promoting the spirit of nationalization to the point of ultra-nationalization, the use of propaganda, state control in companies, and the use of the various military tools, getting training, etc. But he does kind of one thing he does have like with Mussolini is he's not completely getting rid of the monarchy because the new prince has regents appointed by him. So, but he's still the guy with the um, the decisions.
Yeah,
He
he's a military
exploits.
dictator. Yeah.
Yep, he's just prime minister in name. He's a dictator.
Yeah, he's more or less a warlord, if you were to really look at it. But he's actually a fascinating figure. People tend to forget Thailand was not colonized. It's the one place in Southeast Asia that stood firm. It actually thwarted colonization very well, and it modernized its military to a level that allowed it to actually participate in World War One. They did send a squadron of pilots, and they would partake in the what would you call it, the grand parade at the end of World War One. So Thailand is actually what we would call a secondary power, not a first
Hmm.
like tier power, but they
But
basically,
it's regional. It's
of
a
course,
smaller regional power.
yeah.
I think that's a better way to think of it.
But they would have successes against the French at some points. They would have
At
successes,
Indochina.
yeah, and they had a. I'll say this: they modernized their military based off of the Japanese model and some European models, and they would take a lot of equipment ideas from Japan and Europe, etc. Japan really helped them out when it came to modernization. And the Thai shouldn't be underestimated. They had decent weapons, pretty well trained military, small, mind you, it's small, but it's well trained. A decent aircraft. Navy's very, very small, but they actually would have a few successes during some Thai-French wars and such. But yeah, low key.
But
Uh,
I think one thing we should just and I'll just speed it up, is even though it's a neutral country, Plek Fibun is at this moment in time playing both sides. He
yes.
is deciding to choose who's going to either guarantee the security of Thailand or Siam, as it was called at this time,
Yeah.
or from whom he's going to probably profit the most. Quite similar to what Italy's considerations were
Yeah.
before joining World War One.
It's actually a very similar. Yeah, it's a very similar situation. So, Fibun has intelligence within the Japanese system, and he knows that war is on the way. So he's simultaneously negotiating with the British, the Americans, and the Japanese for guarantees. He's trying to get the best deal because he realizes his country is going to be implicated. And basically, he doesn't trust the Japanese whatsoever. But as he's negotiating with the Americans and the British, he doesn't believe that they're capable of helping him, really. So it's a pretty tough situation while he's sitting on the fence. Now, the 15th Army, led by Lieutenant General Aida Shojiro, is going to be actually invading Thailand, and he has two divisions with him. The purpose of this is to help with the Malayan campaign, or the Malaya campaign, but he's also basically just bull rushing through Thailand to get to Burma. Now, obviously, the Japanese want safe passage through Thailand to do these operations, and they start sending, messages to the Thais demanding this. Meanwhile, Fibun is just going to start pleading with the British and Americans, and basically they're never going to give him a answer that he thinks befitting of the situation. So he's going to inevitably cave into the Japanese, but that's for a later date. Now, for the invasion of Thailand and Malaya, Brooke Poppin, as you had mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, had actually come up with a pretty smart idea. It was called Operation Matador. Matador was to be undertaken by the 11th Indian Division, who's positioned up in the north, and it was going to be a preemptive defensive plan, and it was devised in 1941 to counter a potential Japanese invasion of Malaya and Thailand. The plan would aim to see the British and Indian forces go literally over the border into southern Thailand to seize key positions before the Japanese could establish their beachheads, or better said, footholds. This whole strategy centered on securing Singora, or today Songkhla, and Patani. These are two critical Thai ports that Japan absolutely was going to use for its invasion.
I think that's like a better quote, like, Rommel, the best way to stop any amphibious assault is only at the beach,
Yeah, I'm just
when they've
trying
not
to,
yet concentrated their forces.
trying to see if I have a better map. I don't. This is the best map for now. I'll keep this one up because it shows the Thai part of it. The most important parts of the operation was to eliminate this specific feature known as the ledge. Destroying the ledge would effectively obstruct the road from Patani, thereby securing the lines of communication and the retreat of the 11th Indian Division. Now, for the Japanese, capturing the ledge would grant them access to the rear areas of the 11th Indian Division, basically forcing the British to withdraw from places like Perak and Kedah. So if they acted quickly enough, they could even completely isolate the 11th Indian Division and, capture them. By occupying these locations, the British forces hoped to disrupt the Japanese amphibious landings and delay their advance significantly towards Singapore. But Matador faced political and logistical challenges. I think anyone can figure what those are. You're basically asking the British to preemptively invade a neutral country to try and protect it from the Japanese, I guess you could say. And the British were unsure whether the Thais would, are they going to resist the Japanese? Are they going to allow their passage? Are they going to just attack us, the British? Who knows? So they, inevitably, Matador was not to be. It was not given the green light. So instead, Matador was replaced with what has been called kind of a mini Matador operation known as Operation Crowcall. Operation Crowcall is kind of the same idea. It's, to go over the border and seize the same things that we were talking about, like the ledge. The only difference is it's after the Japanese have already initiated the invasion. So thereby kind of justifying the whole thing. But as you can imagine, all of this was pending who's first to get to actually seize the location. So you're at a super huge disadvantage by not preemptively doing so. So it's kind of doomed to fail, Operation Crowcall. Now, I want to bring up a different map. Okay, so here is showing, unfortunately, many of the battles that'll take place in Malaya, but I think it's imperative just so the audience can see some of these locations. In the north, we have Patani. Over in what is Siam. We keep calling it Thailand, but at the time it's Siam. It changes its name 3 times in like a matter of 4 years. We have Jitra at the north as well. These are key locations. Arostar, Kotobaru. These are what we're going to be talking about today. What's my other map? Okay, my other map over here is actually a little bit better looking. I'll leave this one up. Yeah, that's good. All right. So, on December the 4th, troop transports from Hainan Island, escorted by Admiral Kondo, they start to go to their objectives. About 2 days later, the Japanese are spotted by British reconnaissance, but Brooke Popham hasn't authorized to take any action yet. He only wants to put everybody on a full alert because they don't know what's going on. At about 11 o'clock on December the 7th, the Japanese present an ultimatum to Fibun, demanding safe passage, and they give him only 2 hours to respond. This is actually a very famous story. I won't get into the complexities of it, but Fibun couldn't be located until the late morning. It's intentional. So the Thais are going to get invaded. Now, from Indochina, the Imperial Guards Division and the 55th Division are beginning to invade Phra Tabong, and it goes unopposed. They then continue northwest towards, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, Aranyafafet, and meanwhile, a regiment of the 5th Division lands at Patani, with the rest of the division landing at Singora, where they are quickly taking the upper hand against some fierce Thai defenders. So the Thai actually don't just sit on their hands, they do fight back a little bit. From Saigon, elements of the 15th Army would also execute some naval landings across Thailand, and they do face staunch resistance. Actually, I think it'd be better if I go back to my Thai map. You can see here where the Japanese are landing when it comes to Thailand. Uh-huh. And the Thai do put up a resistance. Mind you, it's not all military. It's a lot of police forces, and it's symbolic, we'll call it, in nature. Now, at the same time, and I have to go back to another map. We'll go back to this map. At the same time, almost an hour before the attack on Pearl Harbor, because there are time zones, so you have to imagine it gets a little wonky when you're thinking about what time it is. The 18th Division lands at Kotobaru. The defending force is comprised of the 8th Indian Infantry Brigade, led by Brigadier B.W. Key, and part of the Indian 9th Infantry Division under Major General Barstow. They are supported by four 3.7-inch mountain howitzers from the 21st Mountain Battery, commanded by Major Soper. The 3rd Regiment 17th Battalion of the Dogger Regiment is also commanded by Lieutenant Colonel A.G. Preston, and they're tasked with defending about a 10-mile stretch of coast designated as the landing sites for the Japanese. The British fortified this narrow amount of beaches and islands with landmines, barbed wire, pillboxes, and they received additional support from the 73rd Field Battery of the 5th Field Regiment, Royal Artillery, and they're positioned near the airfield at Kotobaru. The area is also defended by the 3rd Regiment of the Dogras, including the narrow beaches of Badang and Sabak at Kotobaru, separated by two estuaries that lead to the mouth of the Penkalan Chepa River. And this is surrounded by a network of creeks, lagoons, and swampy islands, with Kotobaru's airfield and the main road going inland located behind them. So visually, you can think of it as there's a lot of defenses at the beach where the amphibious landing's coming, and behind them is the airfield, which is the crucial thing that the Japanese are trying to seize. Because to neutralize the airfields basically thwarts most of the defense of northern Malaya. The Dogras swiftly unleash a barrage of artillery and machine gun fire upon the invading forces. By midnight, the initial waves of Japanese troops are approaching the beachfront in their landing crafts. It's kind of like, I guess you could visually say like Saving Private Ryan, but I don't know if you know much about this, Gaurav, but the Japanese certainly did not perfect amphibious warfare. Pretty bad at it. It wasn't something that they specialized in, we'll say that much.
Well, considering the British and Americans also took several hard landings to really learn, it's understandable.
But we'll just say, like, don't picture Saving Private Ryan with like the doors like wheeling out and it goes down, the men start rushing out. It's more like Japanese guys on barges just like dramatically rushing forward and hoping not to get shot. It's not as clean as that. Even though what you see in Saving Private Ryan was, yeah, of course, during Operation Overlord, it's pretty bad. It's pretty rough landing, I'd say that much. Now, Colonel Masanobu Toichi, the infamous evil little guy, he actually happened to be watching this, and he would write most of the accounts of the Malayan campaign. So I have a lot of quotes from him. So at this particular moment, this is what he had to say. The enemy pillboxes, which were well fortified, responded with such overwhelming force that our men lying on the beach, partially submerged in water, could not even lift their heads. So it kind of goes again with like the Saving Private Ryan moment that you would envision in your head. It's pretty brutal. The first and second waves of Japanese soldiers find themselves pinned down pretty quickly by the Dogras' heavy fire from their pillboxes and trenches. However, after a lot of fierce hand-to-hand combat, a breach was finally created in the defenses on the southern bank of the estuary. Meanwhile, over on the northern bank, the Japanese are trapped on an island and they become exposed by dawn with the light coming upon them. Allied aircraft from nearby airfields begin targeting the invasion fleet and the soldiers stranded on the island, resulting in significant casualties for the Japanese initial waves. The defenders employ their artillery, and the Hudsons start to bomb the Japanese positions, while the men in the pillboxes pin down waves upon waves of enemy soldiers, inflicting heavy casualties upon them. They would lose about 7 Hudsons, and they would hit about 3 Japanese troop transports, sinking one of them. Pretty lackluster, to be honest, but Hudsons are not the greatest of aircraft by any means. After intense fighting, the Japanese forces successfully breached the center of the Indian line by about 3:45 a.m., posing a threat to the nearby strategic airfield at Kotobaru. Now, simultaneously, 17 Japanese bombers began launching their attacks on Singapore, inflicting just minor damage, but it's really just to scare the population. And they also inflict damage to some of the airfields, resulting in about 61 casualties, nothing too large. This surprised the British command, however, who had not anticipated that their enemy possessed long-range aircraft. And again, the British had greatly overlooked the Japanese aircraft capabilities. There's very few people who actually understood what Japan was capable of and were sending word back, home. Actually, of all people, the Flying Tigers, Chenault, sorry, in English, Chenault. It's weird to say a French name like that. Chenault, it's hard for me. He actually sent word back of the capabilities of what he called an experimental fighter he was seeing. This was actually the Zero Fighter, and it made it to a magazine in the U.S. Army edition for like it was late 1941, and some guys read this magazine and they just didn't believe him. They thought he was a quack. But the Allies had definitely been given a lot of intelligence as to the capabilities of something like the Zero Fighter. Even the British, too, had seen some stuff in this area. But yeah, people weren't listening. They didn't believe it. But
Well, people tend to forget, since if you're just like, as a slight digression, all the countries noted the effectiveness of machine guns in the Russo-Japanese War,
exactly.
but completely forgot about its efficacy in World War One.
Yeah, and what's so crazy is a lot of the commanders, like just take the Russian commanders, for example. A lot of the Russian commanders who participate in World War One, they actually participate in the Russo-Japanese War. And it's if like they didn't
Exactly.
learn, like they just mowed down Japanese infantry and cavalry. It's like, oh, well, no, it's different here. No, it's insane. Yeah. But the Japanese fighters and bombers, they began to appear over Kotobaru and all the other major airfields in northern Malaya, wreaking absolute havoc on the RAF, demonstrating air superiority at the offset. Now, amidst all of this chaos, two counterattacks from different Malayan battalions were repelled at Kotobaru, leading the British to hastily destroy their northern airfields to prevent them from being captured by the enemy. This was a colossal blunder, by the way. They prematurely destroyed their own airfields while they could have still been operating and still been providing adequate support. It goes without saying. Also, doing this without telling your ground troops who are in the area to defend those airfields, a huge mistake. They really, really fucked up. Yeah.
Actually, even in North Africa, this happens quite a few times
Yeah,
also.
exactly.
So it's not something that just is in the theater of operations.
Yeah. But that night, the defenders were beginning to retreat from the beach areas to better protect Kotobaru itself. Now, meanwhile, amidst all this chaos, confusion is really hitting British headquarters, but Operation Crowcall commences at about 3 p.m. Now, Crowcall is going to consist of the 3rd Regiment of the 16th Punjab Regiment, led by Henry Dawson Moorhead, the 14th Punjab Regiment, led by Cyril Lovesley Lawrence Stokes. Yes, sorry, I was looking at something in my notes of units and I was confused there. The 10th Indian Mountain Battery and the 45th Field Company, Royal Bombay Sapers and Miners. So they're going to be the guys that are in charge of Operation Crowcall, which is kind of a gimped Matador. The column leaves Crow, and it's made up of the soldiers that I said, and they travel in Marmon Harrington AWD trucks that are being provided by the 2nd and 3rd Australian Motor Transport Company, which is commanded by Kernan. So Crowcall is below its intended strength. It actually was supposed to have more men, and it faced delays because the 2nd Battalion of the 14th Punjab Regiment and Light Artillery Battery did not arrive on schedule. So they have basically a doomed mission, and they don't have the necessary amount of men to pull it off.
Considering it's already a toned down Operation Matador, that's brilliant.
Consequently, the column proceeded without them, actually, because they had to. Because the whole thing was speed, and they've already screwed that up. Their goal was to secure a 6-mile stretch of road that had been carved through a steep hillside with a sheer drop in the river of the opposite side, aka, this is what I was talking about before, the ledge. Blowing up the hillside onto the road would significantly hinder the Japanese invasion force. However, upon crossing the border into Thailand, the Indian troops encountered very strong resistance from the Thai. Yes, so the Thai are fighting the Japanese and the incoming British forces, specifically their police forces. And this is going to happen around the town of Patong, led by Major Prayun Ratanakit, These officers established a crucial roadblock that delayed the Indian advance for 2 full days while simultaneously engaging Japanese forces around Patani. After several hours of combat, Japan and Thailand reached an armistice by midday because Fibun, obviously, he had to cave in. So he permitted Japan to have free passage through his country. By the way, it'll come about later, but I want to kind of give it away. The Thai are actually going to ally to the Japanese, and they're the only independent nation to do so. So while Japan just conquers a bunch of people and starts saying that, they're all in this greater co-prosperity sphere working together, it's not true, of course. They're just taking over countries and annexing them. The Thai are actually independent throughout all of this. So the Thai are kind of this little Axis member that no one talks about, to be honest. It's kind of like Bulgaria. Like the Bulgarians joined the Germans, and no one gives shit to the Bulgarians or the Romanians for what they do in World War II. But whatever. Just
So I
saying.
guess Thailand is kind of like the Italy of the Axis forces in the Far
Yeah,
East.
they really are. But I forgive them because they basically just attacked the French, and that's okay. That's fine. You know, they
Okay, I'm with you on that.
I mean, like their excuse is that French Indochina, the French basically attacked their borders and stole some territory, so they were just taking it back. It's what they did. I mean, they do attack the Chinese in Burma, and they do a little bad stuff, but it's okay they attacked the French. They deserved it. Anyways, the Japanese forces in Patani, facing poor road conditions, but no opposition, began their advance towards the ledge position. Obviously, they're clearly going to win this race. It's located about 60 miles away. And so if you were to visually think about this, sorry, do I have my map up? Or I'll just go back to Thailand. It doesn't show the ledge position, but you can imagine from what you can see as Prakan, that's Patani, they're trying to like race up to get to this position. Now, the next day begins with renewed fighting at Kotobaru, as the Japanese pressed against pretty disorganized defenders at this point, and they start to infiltrate around the British strongpoints, causing significant concerns for British command. Consequently, on December the 10th, the defenders were authorized to abandon Kotobaru so that they could retreat south to Machang. Basically, everything's falling apart for what you would call fighting them at the beaches, like what Douglas MacArthur tried to do in the Philippines. It was a huge failure. Yeah, wasn't the plan either. But anyways, now we need to take a sidestep here because while all this is going on with the invasion, who is supposed to really stop the invasion? Who is supposed to go after the naval forces? Well, it's 4C.
Or C.
Yeah, the deterrence, of course. And I'm going to bring up. Yeah, well, we'll use this map for now. Sorry, I have to. Can you see the full length of the map, by the way, Gaurav?
Yeah, this is a good one. It's
Okay.
visible now.
Yeah, because for some reason there doesn't exist a decent map of the movement of 4C, but I thought this one kind of showed it a bit. So, following the establishment of 4C, reports began to emerge by December the 6th regarding, Japanese troop movements near Malaya. The next day, it became pretty obvious that the Japanese were about to invade places in Southeast Asia. Admiral Phillips received a message inquiring about possible actions with his available naval forces and air forces. What could he do? He responded that he would strive to engage the enemy. So on December the 8th, and this is local time, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Admiral Phillips ordered his forces to set sail so that they could intercept and eliminate the Japanese invasion force spotted in the South China Sea, despite having any air support. He was told and aware of the risks, but he believed he could probably finish, or I will actually say this quote, finish quickly and escape to the east before the Japanese could organize a significant attack against us, is what he had told his commanders. Now, the Japanese had begun bombing Singapore, so the HMS Prince of Wales, Repulse, and the four destroyers, they depart while this is happening. It's crucial to note that about 10 Brewster Buffalo fighters were assigned to cover 4C, to be their cap, and they were awaiting orders to support the naval group. However, Phillips left port without even anticipating the need for their cover.
Because aircraft in combat are completely useless, right?
Exactly. So, for layman's terms, he needed to be in a certain proximity to their radius of operations because land-based aircraft can really not go out very far or long or participate in combat over the sea. risks them crashing, basically. So he basically didn't tell them he was doing this, and he went too far out. So he kind of screwed over the operations of his air support, which, yeah, that's what he did. So his intention was to quickly and decisively disrupt the Japanese landing at Kotobaru, which I agree with. I think it was actually very brave what he tried to do. And I think it was worthwhile because if he could have, this is something we could have seen in Leyte Gulf, for example. If the Japanese had broken through, it was possible. My God, do you know the destruction the Prince of Wales and the Repulse could do to a freaking Japanese transport fleet with not terribly strong escorts, mind you? It could have been, it really could have done a lot, but that's not what's going to happen. From the very beginning, 4C faced significant challenges in locating the Japanese fleet.
It just reminds me of what Leyte Gulf's objectives were. Exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same kind of situation. Now, from the beginning, 4C is finding it very difficult to track where the Japanese fleet is as they're moving northwest into the Gulf of Siam. And they're trying to head towards what is becoming a Japanese beachhead at Kotobaru. Because remember, it takes a long time for the Japanese to get off their ships, to get their equipment and everything down. They're going to be stuck there. They're very vulnerable. And this is in northern Malaya. By the afternoon of December the 9th, the Japanese submarine, the I-65, locates 4C and reports their position to Japanese command, followed by reconnaissance planes that start circling them. Phillips alters his course to intercept the landing at Kotan, which, sorry, that's, I think, the modern name for Kotobaru. I had written that in my notes. I keep using the present names and the old names, my bad. And further down, oh, sorry, no, it's a different place, further down the coast. But this actually was a diversionary landing. Crews aboard the ships begin to hear reports of air battles occurring over northern Malaya. Yet they remain confident that the Japanese air forces would be no match for their two heavy warships. Bert Wynn, a seaman aboard the Repulse, recalled this amongst his fellow crew members. The main topic of conversation was how long it would take us to sink the Japanese warships believed to be off the coast of Singora. I still remember the overwhelming sense of confidence that permeated the ship. The outcome of such an engagement was seen as a mere formality. Again, they really very confident against the Japanese. Yeah, but you always have to remember the Americans and the British would go on in the 1930s to say the Japanese weren't capable of creating anything themselves, that they would just replicate and copy their designs, and they wouldn't do them well. They legitimately believed that everything that they had was basically second rate. Would turn to be false.
Or not to mention just the Pearl Harbor, it was said, right? They actually thought that Japan could not do all of it at once, and they thought that at least at Pearl Harbor, it's not even going to be a strike. It's just going to be undercover agents in a sabotage mission.
Yeah, they that was a large reason for why their aircraft were lined up the way that they were at the airfields. They feared sabotage operations were ongoing. Might I add, they did realize there was a Japanese spy and there were German spies caught at Pearl Harbor. They had an idea like stuff was going on. It's just, yeah. There's a lot of people who believe that Japan couldn't have done Pearl Harbor and that it had to be Germans directing the whole thing, which is just really racist and messed up.
Or the fact that, it was the British that sank its own ocean liner, the Lusitania, on the first day of the war.
That's the conspiracy theories. Yeah, the advanced knowledge theory stuff there. But during the afternoon of the 9th, a British patrol plane finally spots the Japanese surface force. A flag deck officer aboard the Repulse remarked to CBS radio correspondent Cecil Brown, actually a very famous person, who would go on to say, oh, sorry, he said this to Cecil Brown, excuse me. Oh, but they're Japanese. There's nothing to worry about. So, you imagine this news reporter is like, okay, guess we're going to be safe. Now, during the night, over dinner in the officer's room, Cecil Brown raised a pretty enlightening question. Given what had just happened at Pearl Harbor, were the British not being overly confident? The British officers around him who were eating their meal thought about the question thoughtfully and conceded it was wrong to estimate one's enemy. Yet the prevailing feeling amongst them all was summed up by one officer's reply, and it was this: "We are not overconfident. We just don't think the enemy is much good. They could not beat China for over 5 years. And now look what they're doing out here, jumping all over the map instead of meeting at one or two places. They cannot be very smart to be doing that." Yeah. Okay.
We're not overconfident. That just
Yeah.
smacks overconfidence to me.
So it's 11 a.m., December the 10th. Japanese aircraft begin initiating their assault on Force Z, something that Force Z probably wasn't expecting. They launched three waves of Nell and Betty bombers from the 22nd Air Flotilla stationed in Indochina near Saigon. The planes traversed the South China Sea for over 5 hours. This is a long distance travel, approaching the point of no return. British lookouts spot eight Nells appearing like ominous black dots against the horizon. The Marine, buglers start sounding the alarm for general quarters. The Nels approach at an altitude of about 12,000 feet as the crews hurry to their stations. It becomes evident they don't have any air support. Their defenses are the only ones on hand, so that means they're depending solely upon anti-aircraft batteries. But the British must have been very confident, as aircraft had proved incapable of hitting warships, apparently. So they probably were like, yeah, we're just going to shoot these things out of the sky. It must have been pretty rough for them when they realized their guns were malfunctioning too, like on top of everything. So Phillips refrained from calling any assistance. He wanted to maintain radio silence. The sky erupted with black bursts of flak from the anti-aircraft guns as the Nells maintained tight formations and they began releasing several 250-kilogram bombs. The Repulse twisted and turned violently, trying to evade many bombs, but one would strike her seaplane deck, instantly killing about 24 men, but it wouldn't hinder her maneuverability. At 11:15, Captain William Tennant attempted to contact the RAF for support, but obviously it's too late by this point. Now, at 11:30 a.m., 17 Nells start approaching at nearly wave top level, intensifying their attack on the Prince of Wales. The Nells divide into two groups, flying up just about 100 feet, attacking from both bows. 9 Nells leveled off and commenced their assault on the Prince of Wales. The ship's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, but the tropical weather has rendered their surface radar inoperable, forcing the crews to aim by sight alone. The planes speed past the ship's 5-inch guns, closing the distance. The crew's inexperience became quite apparent as they struggled to accurately adjust their guns on the incoming aircraft. Once past the heavy anti-aircraft batteries, the Nells encountered the quick-firing 40mm guns, known for their destructive power. It's actually true, they're very good against aircraft. But the lack of radar and inexperience of the crews resulted in futile firing upon the approaching planes. As the planes entered torpedo range, they released their payload and they sped away, suffering just a single loss. A single torpedo raced through the water, striking a critical blow near the outer propeller shaft. After the hit, Lieutenant Wildish managed to shut off the shaft, but when it was turned back on, water began to flood into engine room B. This incident highlighted the ship's overlooked flaws, leading to devastating consequences. The torpedo disabled auxiliary power to the pumping systems, halting the water removal and causing the ship to list about 11.5 degrees to port. Additionally, the hit rendered her 5-inch guns powerless, making them impossible to maneuver. The ship was now reduced to a speed of about 15 knots, which is pretty slow. She was severely damaged, and her anti-aircraft batteries were rapidly beginning to flood. They're compromised.
Yeah, not to mention the ones on the port side are completely useless given the angle now.
Oh, yeah. This attack was followed up by 26 Betty bombers at about 12:20, so things are escalating, who all dropped torpedoes, by the way. Repulse managed to avoid 20 torpedoes dropped simultaneously on each of her bows, which is it's a hammer and anvil attack. As Cecil Brown would recall in this quote, "For me, this whole picture, orange flame belching from the 4-inchers, white tracers from pom-poms and Vickers guns, and gray airplanes astonishingly close, like butterflies pinned on blue cardboard. It's a confusing, macabre game." The Repulse then took about 2 or 3 hits, no one knows for sure, and one of her crew would recall, "Suddenly there was a massive explosion. I immediately knew we had lost Repulse. For within seconds, she took up a frightening list to port, so rapid, no amount of counterflooding would save her." Her captain, her captain ordered abandoned ship, shouting, "You've put up a good show. Now save yourselves." Which I guess that confidence is gone. Repulse lost her second propeller, cutting her power in about half. Men began jumping into the sea, and many would drown while treading for water for hours. And they would be actually traveling a lot of oil as well. It's very dangerous. At about 12:23, Repulse rolled over and sank stern first, her huge hull protruding vertically from the sea. It's actually like the movie Titanic, if you think about it. And the destroyer escorts were frantically trying to grab survivors. With Repulse out of the picture, a new wave of Japanese bombers now targeted the already damaged Prince of Wales. At 12:44, a 500 kilogram bomb, that's a big ass bomb, dropped by a Betty, hit her between her stacks, which is an incredible hit if you think about it. Like it's a moving ship. It's going slow, but that's a big hit. It's pretty impressive. This unfortunately hit her in the stacks where many wounded crew members were located. This resulted in
Ouch.
numerous casualties. That's a really big bomb again aboard the Prince of Wales, leading to the orders for abandoned ship. As the vessel began to roll over, men were trapped below deck. Destroyers rushed in desperation to try and rescue any survivors from the water, and a Japanese pilot flying overhead went so close, apparently, that people saw this. He taunted in clear English, "We have finished our task, you may carry on." I I don't know if this really happened, but I've read this in two different books. There's a lot of these books, they sprinkle this dramatic stuff in. I don't know.
Uh, I mean, I can't imagine it like a pilot just actually being able to say that during combat, just given the chaos and the noises of everything around. Like, there's no way he could have been heard,
Yeah.
especially with the roar of his own cockpit.
Yep. The Prince of Wales would actually scrape the HMS Express as she tried to pick up sailors, almost taking her down. Because, I mean, it's a destroyer going near such a big ship. As the ship started sinking, Captain William Tennant gave the abandoned ship orders personally. As 10 Buffaloes would arrive, they would see Prince of Wales sink. They came far too late to prevent the disaster. I mean, they couldn't have done anything anyways. Mind you, I guess even 10 Buffaloes against those bombers, maybe they could have dissuaded them, but I doubt it. The pilots would recall, after an hour, lack of petrol forced me to leave. But during that hour, I had seen many men in dire danger, waving, cheering, and joking as if they were holidaymakers at Brighton, waving at a low-flying aircraft. It shook me, for here was something above human nature. Just over an hour, the era of the battleship had come to a devastating end, resulting in the loss of 47 British officers and 793 men, including poor Admiral Tom Phillips. The British had to concede that the attack was executed flawlessly. The captain of the Repulse later remarked, "The enemy's attacks were undoubtedly carried out magnificently, and they pressed home effectively. The high-level bombers maintained tight formations and did not veer off course." It was a meticulously coordinated assault, with the high-level bombers striking first to distract the gunners, followed closely up by the low-flying torpedo bombers that delivered the lethal blows, in, of course, anvil attacks. The sinking of the British battleships was a heavy blow to the British Navy, but it was also a terrible omen for the Malayan defenders, as for everyone else trying to resist in the north. By December the 10th, the Crowcall detachment had finally arrived to the town of Batang, just 26 miles from their target, the ledge. They began to navigate through the Patani River towards the ledge, but they were caught off guard by a Japanese ambush, forcing them to retreat when they were just a mile away from their target. Meanwhile, I should probably pull up a map back to, this map is the good one.
Yeah.
Here we go. Meanwhile, the 5th Division's regiment reached the ledge by midday on December the 10th. Consequently, the Indians secured significant casualties, and they were ultimately pushed back to Kroll by December the 13th. The rest of the 5th Division had advanced southwards from Singora to the Malay border, directly opposing Jitra, and intending to take Alusatar. Major General David Murray Leon of the 11th Indian Division, who had his forces in weak defensive positions at the road junction of Jitra, was not aware that the main objective of his defense, the Alor Sitar airfield, had already been abandoned. They didn't tell them. As I was saying, the guys who destroyed their own airfields, it's incredible how premature everything was done. From the coast, the 6th Indian Brigade defended a sector 10 miles long, while the 15th Indian Brigade held the road around the area, and the 28th Indian Brigade was in reserve. The Indians were already sent 2 detachments to delay the Japanese advance on the 9th, but seeing the Japanese rapidly advancing, Murray Leon placed his 2 battalions north of Jitra to try and give the Indian defenders more time to prepare their lines. This covering force came into contact with the Japanese and tanks especially on the morning of December the 11th, and they were completely and quickly overrun after suffering heavy casualties. The loss of these battalions forced Murray to bring his forward reserves, leaving Alor-Setar lightly defended. Now, at night, Japanese tanks began to reach the main the British positions north of Jitra, with the rest of the 5th Division coming closely behind. Heavy fighting ensued between the Japanese tanks and very demoralized Indian troops, ending with the penetration of the British defensive lines around 6 a.m. Several Indian forces were overrun, prompting Murray to repeatedly request permission to withdraw. At about 7:30, General Percival, who had at this point received like so many demands to withdraw, finally granted his request, prompting the Indian troops to withdraw to a new defensive position at Gurun. But due to extremely poor communication and significant confusion, Murray forces incurred tremendous casualties, and they were unable to disengage from the Japanese by December the 13th. Consequently, the 11th Indian Division was severely weakened, and they were the primary defenders of northern Malaya. And now northern Malaya was breached. As the Japanese began to advance down the Malayan Peninsula, and thus our episode is ending here, but that encompasses what we would call, stop sharing, the invasion of Malaya. The Japanese have just gotten started, and they're breaching the defensive positions of the British very quickly. The Operation Matador being replaced by Crowcall proved to be a disaster. And now it's going to be a game of how quickly can the British put up defensive positions to delay the Japanese while they are clearly going to be advancing south to hit Singapore. And we're going to leave it there.
Their very own form of rapid warfare.
Yeah. In what is going to be called Yamashita's Blitzkrieg. And I don't want to give away anything because it's a tremendous story and it's innovative, but it'll be in the next episode. But before we leave the audience, I want to repeat to everybody, if you want to further support the channel, please check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series with, it's like 24 plus episodes, I think, ongoing now. You get early access to all the content I make, and I just put up a new documentary today covering the Boxer Rebellion and Russo-Japanese War, and you get voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Gaurav, thank you for letting me take you hostage on this one.
You're welcome. Looking forward to continuing the series.
And of course, we have much more to come. Echoes of War is not exclusive to the Pacific War. We're going to be covering all types of history, and we already have a lot of ideas. And more to come.
I'll just say we already have firmed up our pipeline for, I think, 30 or so episodes from now.
Yep.
And then we'll continue to expand on that.
Definitely. Until then, bye, guys.